My own blood, my sister, tried to destroy my life for a stack of cash. If you believe that truth is the ultimate revenge, then subscribe to Revenge with Roxy right now and comment where you're watching from, so we know you're standing with us. Your Honor, my sister is simply too unstable and unpredictable to handle our father's estate. Beatrice's voice, thick with manufactured grief, echoed through the cavernous courtroom. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, a perfect little performance of sorrow, her other hand gesturing dramatically toward me on the witness stand. She's been having episodes of severe depression and anxiety since his passing. I have medical documentation proving she's unfit to make sound financial decisions. I sat frozen in that sterile, soulless room in Portland, Oregon. The polished wood and cold marble seemed to shrink around me, the air growing thin and heavy. A hot, creeping shame crawled up my neck, scorching my cheeks as I watched my own flesh and blood paint me as a fragile, dangerous lunatic who couldn't be trusted with her own inheritance. It was a masterpiece of deceit, and she was the star of the show. The judge, a man with tired eyes and a well-meaning face, nodded sympathetically at her testimony. He was buying every last poisonous word. My name is Lily Patterson, and I'm 32 years old. 6 months ago, cancer stole my father from me. Now his own daughter, my sister, was trying to steal everything he had ever worked for. But the real devastation, the wound that cut deeper than any financial loss, wasn't about the money. It was the cold, methodical precision of her betrayal. The calculated cruelty of a plan she had hatched while our father was taking his final, ragged breaths in a hospital bed. The documents were spread across the defendant's table, a fortress of paper designed to fool anyone. Medical records, psychological evaluations, psychiatric recommendations, all bearing my name, all detailing a phantom history of mental illness so severe it would make anyone doubt my sanity. According to Beatrice's carefully crafted fiction, I was suffering from severe bipolar disorder, had a history of multiple suicide attempts, and required constant supervision just to get through the day. None of it was real. Not a single word. But in that moment, as I watched the judge's expression shift from sympathy to genuine concern with each new document, I understood the terrifying brilliance of her fraud. She had plundered my medical information during those endless, agonizing nights at the hospital, using it to spin a web of authentic-looking lies. She had even schooled herself in the correct medical jargon, her words landing with the weight of professional authority. She becomes violent when confronted about her spending habits, Beatrice continued, her voice trembling with expertly faked emotion. Last month, she threw a vase at me during a family dinner. I'm genuinely concerned about what might happen if she gains control of father's assets. She could hurt herself or others. A silent scream built in my throat. I wanted to leap to my feet and expose her for the predator she was. But my lawyer's hand on my arm was a firm reminder. Stay calm, trust the process. What he couldn't grasp was that Beatrice was the process. She had anticipated everything, spent months laying a trail of breadcrumbs that led to the single, inevitable conclusion. I was mentally incompetent. The vase. I remembered it clearly. It had been knocked from the table during a heated argument, an accident. But she had been there with her phone, photographing the shattered porcelain, twisting an accident into a calculated act of violence. As her testimony flowed on, a single terrifying thought echoed in the chambers of my mind. What if she wins? Growing up, Beatrice and I had been more than sisters. We were a unit. 4 years my senior, she was my protector, my confidant, my guide. Our childhood in the misty suburbs of Portland was a tapestry woven with shared secrets, whispered late into the night, a bond so tight it was the envy of our friends. When a car accident stole our mother from us when I was 15, it was Beatrice who stepped into that void, helping Dad raise me. I believed our connection was forged in steel, unbreakable. But I was naive. I didn't understand that money doesn't just change people. It reveals who they truly are. Our father, Robert Patterson, was the definition of a self-made man. He'd started Patterson Construction with little more than a beat-up pickup truck, a handful of tools, and an unshakable will. He'd built it from the ground up into one of Oregon's most respected firms, a giant in commercial buildings and luxury homes. By the time pancreatic cancer delivered its cruel diagnosis last year, his company was valued at nearly $2 million. Not to mention his substantial savings and properties, the shift began during Dad's final months, in the hushed, antiseptic corridors of the hospital. Beatrice's ambition, always a simmering fire, began to burn with a new intensity. I noticed subtle changes, small things that felt wrong. She'd insist on handling all of Dad's paperwork, cloaking her motives in the guise of sparing me the burden. She was the first to arrive for visiting hours and the last to leave, a portrait of the devoted daughter. I saw devotion. I should have seen opportunity. In those private moments, she wasn't comforting our dying father. She was photographing his medical files, his insurance policies, his private information. She was a vulture circling, waiting. She gained access to his office, supposedly to organize his affairs, and even persuaded him to grant her power of attorney, just in case. Dad had always been clear. Beatrice and I would inherit everything, split right down the middle. He'd talked about updating his will to include some recent property acquisitions, but the cancer was a relentless thief, moving faster than any of us could have imagined. He was gone before he could make the changes. The existing will was simple. 50/50ths. That's when the curtain lifted, and Beatrice revealed the monster she had become. 2 weeks after we buried him, she approached me, her face a mask of concern. "Lily, sweetheart," she began, her voice as soft as silk. "I've been thinking about Dad's estate. You've been so fragile since he died. Maybe it would be better if I handled the finances until you're feeling more yourself." I had been seeing a grief counselor, Dr. Catherine Winters, a psychiatrist who was helping me navigate the suffocating fog of loss. The sessions were my lifeline, a way to process my pain constructively. To Beatrice, my therapy wasn't a sign of strength. It was an admission of weakness, a weapon she could use against me. "I don't need you to manage my inheritance," I told her, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm perfectly capable." That was the last civil conversation we ever had. Days later, her lawyer's papers arrived. The petition for guardianship, the claims of mental incompetence, the mountain of fabricated medical records. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to her weave her fiction, the devastating truth finally hit me. I was never her beloved sister. I was simply the last obstacle standing between her and our father's entire fortune. The moment that truly shattered my world was when her lawyer presented a thick, professionally bound folder that he claimed was my complete psychiatric file. The details inside were so intimate, so specific. They made my blood run cold. These forged records alleged that I had been in secret treatment for severe bipolar disorder for years, that I'd been hospitalized multiple times for psychotic breaks, and that I was on a daily cocktail of medications to keep my violent outbursts in check. "Your Honor." "These medical records span the past 3 years," her attorney announced, holding the damning folder aloft. "They clearly document Miss Patterson's deteriorating mental state and her increasing inability to make rational decisions. My client has been quietly managing these crises to protect both her sister and their father's business." I watched in sheer horror as he flipped through page after page of lies. There were prescriptions I'd never filled, therapy notes from sessions I'd never had, even intake forms from hospitals I'd never set foot in. Beatrice hadn't just lied. She had constructed an entire alternate reality, a comprehensive fiction so detailed it would convince any sane person. I was a complete lunatic. The judge peered at the documents, his brow furrowed with concern. He kept glancing over at me, his eyes assessing me, as if trying to gauge whether I might suddenly snap and start screaming. "Miss Patterson," he said, his voice grave, addressing me directly. "Are you currently taking any psychiatric medications?" "No, Your Honor," I managed to say, my own voice a foreign, trembling thing. "I've only been attending grief counseling with Dr. Catherine Winters to process my father's death. These documents are forgeries. They are completely fabricated." Beatrice's lawyer was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, Your Honor." Denial of one's mental illness is a classic symptom of the conditions described in these very records. Miss Patterson's inability to acknowledge her own Psychological problems is precisely why she requires supervised care. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. If I denied her claims, I was delusional. If I admitted to the emotional turmoil of losing my father, I was unstable. She had boxed me in, anticipating my every move and preparing a counter for each one. Furthermore, her attorney pressed on. Miss Patterson has been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. She's made several large, impulsive purchases, has had angry outbursts at family gatherings, and has expressed paranoid beliefs that her own sister is plotting against her. The lies were so specific, so plausible. The large purchases were payments for our father's funeral and his lingering medical bills. The angry outbursts were my raw human reactions to Beatrice's gaslighting and manipulation. And the paranoid beliefs about her plotting against me. They were turning out to be horrifyingly, devastatingly accurate. As I sat there, being dismantled piece by piece, a crushing wave of helplessness washed over me. Beatrice had spent months building this prison of lies, and she'd done it so meticulously that even I was beginning to question my own reality. But then, through the fog of despair, a name cut through. Dr. Catherine Winters. My therapist. The one person who had the actual real records. The one person who could burn Beatrice's entire fantasy to the ground. That tiny glimmer of hope was all I had left. The judge's preliminary ruling landed like a punch to the gut. Based on the evidence presented, he announced, his voice echoing in the silent room, I am inclined to grant temporary guardianship to Ms. Beatrice Patterson, pending a full psychological evaluation of the respondent. My world fractured. Ms. Lily Patterson will undergo a comprehensive psychiatric assessment within the next 30 days to determine her competency to manage her financial affairs. I watched Beatrice fight to suppress a smile, dabbing her eyes with that damn tissue as she nodded solemnly. She had won. The first battle was hers. But as we all stood, the judge added something that made a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. However, he continued, I am troubled by some inconsistencies in the medical documentation. The court will appoint an independent psychiatrist to review these records and conduct the evaluation. We will reconvene in 2 weeks for a final hearing. That sliver of doubt in his voice was a lifeline. Maybe the forgeries weren't as flawless as she believed. Maybe a real expert would see the cracks in her facade. As we filed out, Beatrice's lawyer whispered something in her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but the confident set of her shoulders told me she wasn't worried. She believed her paper fortress was impenetrable. In the hallway, she cornered me, her voice dripping with the same fake sympathy she'd used in the courtroom. Lily, she said, placing a hand on my arm. I want you to know I'm only doing this because I love you. Once you get the help you need, we can work together to honor Dad's memory. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. She was a thief, a liar who had orchestrated my public humiliation, and she was still playing the role of the caring big sister. I know exactly what you're doing, I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a rage I could barely contain. And when the truth comes out, you're going to face consequences you can't even imagine. She let out a soft, chilling laugh. Sweetheart, you're just proving my point about your paranoid delusions. There is no conspiracy. There are just medical facts and a legal system designed to protect you from yourself. Her lawyer, smug and victorious, joined her. Miss Patterson, I'd suggest you use these next 2 weeks to prepare for your evaluation. Cooperation will look good when we're determining your long-term care. They were talking about my life as if it were already over, as if I were a problem to be managed. But they had made one fatal error. They assumed Dr. Catherine Winters was a secret I'd keep. They assumed patient confidentiality would be a shield for their lies. They had no idea that the moment I saw those forgeries, my first call had been to her. Dr. Winters wasn't just my therapist. She was a fierce advocate for the truth. When I showed her the fabricated documents, her professional calm had shattered, replaced by cold fury. Beatrice hadn't just forged my records. She had used Dr. Winters' letterhead and forged her signature. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a serious crime. As I watched my sister and her lawyer walk away, Already planning the next phase of my destruction, a grim determination settled over me. They thought the fight was over. The real battle was just about to begin. Those 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. Beatrice moved swiftly, using her temporary guardianship to lock me out of everything. My bank accounts were frozen. The locks on Dad's house, my childhood home, were changed. She claimed it was for security, but it was a power play, a way to make me feel helpless and alone. But she wasn't the only one who was busy. Dr. Winters and I were building a case so airtight it would suffocate every one of Beatrice's lies. In her office, surrounded by my real medical files, Dr. Winters meticulously documented every single discrepancy. The fabricated documents use medical terminology, but it's used incorrectly, she explained, her finger tracing a line in one of the forged reports. Whoever wrote this clearly just Googled psychiatric symptoms and copied and pasted language. They have no understanding of how a real diagnosis is made or documented. She laid the real and fake records side by side. The comparison was damning. The forgeries listed prescriptions for medications that weren't even approved for the conditions they cited. They described clusters of symptoms that were medically contradictory. They included results from tests that had never been performed. More importantly, Dr. Winters said, her eyes hard as steel. They forged my signature and used my official letterhead. This isn't just fraud against you, Lily. This is the impersonation of a medical professional. That's a felony. We spent hours preparing, dissecting every lie. The real records painted a clear picture, a grieving daughter seeking healthy coping mechanisms. The sessions focused on emotional support, not treating a non-existent mental illness. Dr. Winters even prepared a forensic analysis of the forgeries, identifying specific phrases lifted directly from medical websites, showing how Beatrice had built her house of cards from publicly available information. Meanwhile, I became a detective in my own life. I contacted the hospital and found nurses who remembered Beatrice taking pictures of Dad's files, claiming she needed them for insurance. They recalled her asking unusually detailed questions about his treatments, which at the time seemed like the concern of a loving daughter. I spoke to Dad's business partners, who confirmed she'd been probing into the company's finances for months, gathering intelligence for her eventual takeover. The most chilling discovery came when I pieced together the timeline of Dad's final weeks. Beatrice had inserted herself into every conversation with doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors. She had become the gatekeeper of all information, positioning herself as the responsible one while secretly stockpiling the ammunition she needed for her war against me. Asterisk. By the time the final hearing date arrived, I felt a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. We had a mountain of evidence. But I knew my sister. She wasn't going to surrender. She had invested everything in this deception. The night before the hearing, my phone rang. It was her. Lily, I've been thinking, she said, her voice oozing a false sincerity. Maybe we can compromise. If you withdraw your objections to the guardianship, I'll make sure you're well taken care of. You'll have an allowance, everything you need. I'll handle all the stress. She was offering me pocket money from my own inheritance, a gilded cage where she held all the keys. It was a trap masquerading as an olive branch. No deal, Beatrice, I said, my voice firm. I'll see you in court. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with Dr. Winters at my side. My briefcase was heavy with the truth. Beatrice was already there, playing her part to perfection. Dressed in somber, conservative colors, she looked every bit the reluctant hero, the sister forced to make a terrible choice to protect her unstable sibling. But when she saw Dr. Winters walk in with me, her mask of composure slipped, just for a second. A flicker of pure panic in her eyes. Your Honor, her lawyer began. We are prepared to present additional evidence supporting our petition. Ms. Lily Patterson's condition has deteriorated. She's been making increasingly irrational statements about conspiracies and forgeries. He was trying to poison the well, to frame my defense as just another symptom of my illness. It was a smart play, but he had no idea what was coming. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, we have compelling evidence that the medical records presented to this court were systematically fabricated. To prove it, we have brought the defendant's actual treating physician, Dr. Catherine Winters, to testify. The judge looked from me to Dr. Winters, intrigued. Dr. Winters, you are Miss Patterson's psychiatrist? Yes, Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and steady. Miss Patterson has been my patient for grief counseling. She has never been diagnosed with any serious mental illness, and she has never exhibited any of the symptoms described in those fraudulent records. Beatrice's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. Patient confidentiality. I have Miss Patterson's written consent to discuss her medical history. Dr. Winters replied smoothly, producing the signed release form. And more importantly, I have evidence that someone has forged my signature and used my practice's letterhead to create these documents. The color drained from my sister's face. Dr. Winters opened her briefcase, and the truth began to spill out. The side-by-side comparisons were devastating. The inconsistencies, the impossible symptom combinations, the non-existent medications. These forgeries contain multiple, basic medical errors that no trained professional would ever make. Dr. Winters testified. They described treatment protocols that violate established psychiatric practice. As the evidence piled up, I watched Beatrice's carefully constructed world crumble. She whispered frantically to her lawyer, who was beginning to look ashen. The documents that had once seemed so impenetrable were being exposed as an amateurish, desperate sham. Furthermore, Dr. Winters concluded, her voice ringing with authority, someone impersonated me. That is a serious criminal offense. The judge's expression had turned to stone. What began as a family squabble had been revealed as a calculated criminal conspiracy. Beatrice finally understood. Her perfect plan was in ruins. Just when Beatrice's composure was shattering, the courtroom doors swung open again. Dr. Winters strode back in, holding a second briefcase. The look on my sister's face was no longer just panic. It was pure, unadulterated terror. The smug confidence she'd worn like armor was gone, replaced by the ghastly white of a cornered animal. Your Honor, Dr. Winters announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. I have additional evidence that proves these records were not only forged, but that Miss Beatrice Patterson systematically stole her sister's private medical information to create them. Beatrice's lawyer leaped up, sputtering objections, but the judge waved him into silence. His eyes locked on the new evidence. Dr. Winters presented computer forensic reports showing unauthorized access to medical databases using stolen credentials. She produced time-stamped photographs proving exactly when the forgeries were created. And then came the final, brutal blow. Security footage from the hospital, clear as day, showing Beatrice in our father's room, phone in hand, taking pictures of confidential files. The person who created these documents copied medical terminology directly from online sources. Dr. Winters testified, methodically dismantling every lie. She pointed out impossible drug interactions, contradictory diagnoses, and treatment plans that were medical nonsense. The once convincing records were now revealed for what they were, a desperate, pathetic fraud. Ms. Lily Patterson, Dr. Winters stated for the record, has never been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, has never had suicidal ideations, and has never exhibited violent behavior. The person who forged these documents has committed fraud against this court, against Miss Patterson, and against my medical practice. Beatrice was a statue of ice, watching her life's ambition and her freedom evaporate before her eyes. Her lawyer was speechless, the realization dawning on him that he had been an unwitting pawn in a felony. The judge's face was a thundercloud. Miss Beatrice Patterson, he boomed, his voice shaking with fury. You appear to have committed perjury, document fraud, and identity theft in an attempt to defraud your sister of her rightful inheritance. The word felonies hung in the air. Her charade was over. As the judge summoned the court officers, Beatrice finally broke. No, wait! She shrieked, tears real ones, this time streaming down her face. You don't understand. I was just trying to protect our father's legacy. Lily can't handle that kind of responsibility. Her desperate, self-serving confession only dug her grave deeper. Every word directly contradicted her sworn testimony. The judge had no sympathy left. "Miss Patterson," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You have systematically deceived this court. You have committed perjury under oath, forged professional documents, and attempted to steal your sister's inheritance. These are serious charges that will result in substantial prison time." As the officers approached, she turned to me, her face a grotesque mask of rage and desperation. "You've ruined everything," she screamed, the loving sister act finally dead and buried. "Dad always loved you more. You're destroying our family over money." Her true self was finally revealed. Bitter, greedy, and consumed by a jealousy I had never known existed. "Miss Lily Patterson," the judge said, his voice softening as he turned to me. "I apologize that this court was so thoroughly deceived. Your father's will shall be executed as written. You will receive your full inheritance. Furthermore, you may pursue civil damages against your sister for the emotional distress and financial harm she has caused." I watched them lead Beatrice away in handcuffs. The woman I once loved, the sister I had trusted with my life, was now a convicted felon. A wave of emotions washed over me, relief, sadness, and a profound, quiet sense of justice. In the end, Beatrice was sentenced to 3 years in prison for perjury, forgery, and attempted fraud. Her reputation was annihilated. The legal community blacklisted her, and the financial cost of her defense and court-ordered restitution left her financially shattered. Our family, or what was left of it, disowned her. Her betrayal was a wound that would never fully heal, but watching her face the consequences of her actions gave me the closure I needed. With the inheritance Dad wanted me to have, I finally went back to school and got the business degree I'd postponed to care for him. The ordeal taught me a brutal lesson about the darkness that can hide in plain sight, but it also taught me to fight. Beatrice tried to write my story, to cast me as a broken, helpless victim. But I took back the pen. I wrote my own ending, one of strength, resilience, and peace.